The hypothalamus is another region of the diencephalon. It's inferior to the thalamus. It's this whole region right in here that has these large number of different kinds of neurons. As you can see, the hypothalamus is just above the pituitary gland, and when we get to the chapter on the endocrine system, the hypothalamus will be a major portion of our discussion. The hypothalamus plays a role in the control of the autonomic nervous system. We'll have a whole chapter on the autonomic nervous system a little bit later on, but you might remember that the autonomic nervous system is a part of the nervous system that regulates the contraction of smooth muscle and cardiac muscle and the secretions of many glands. So through the autonomic nervous system, the hypothalamus is a major regulator of visceral activities. For instance, regulating your heart rate, the movement of food through the GI tract, and the contraction of the urinary bladder. Another very important function of the hypothalamus is its production of a variety of hormones. And we're going to talk about this a lot when we get to the endocrine system, but we're going to give you a brief introduction to this in just a few minutes when we look at a couple different slides that illustrate this. The hypothalamus is also your thermostat. In other words, it helps control your body temperature. If the body is too hot, then the hypothalamus will send out messages to bring your body temperature down. If, on the other hand, you're too cold, then the hypothalamus will send out messages to make your muscles shiver and warm you up. Along with the limbic system, another portion of the brain that we'll discuss later, the hypothalamus participates in the regulation of emotional and behavioral patterns, eating and drinking rhythms, body temperature, as just mentioned, and circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythms are things like circadian rhythms are biological activity rhythms that are related to your sleep-wake cycle during a 24-hour period. What happens is the hypothalamus receives information from the eyes that indicates that it's nighttime, and then will send information to a different part of the hypothalamus, and also another part of the brain called the reticular formation, and also another gland called the pineal gland. You might want to read about the pineal gland in the section of your textbook under the epithalamus section. This gland secretes melatonin, which is involved in helping control your sleep-wake cycle. Here's a picture that illustrates the location of the hypothalamus in relation to the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus is this region up here, and here's the pituitary gland. And as you can see, there's two parts to the pituitary gland, an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe. What happens is that the hypothalamus, as we could see here, contains a bunch of neurosecretory cells. These neurosecretory cells are neurons, but they're also endocrine cells. They secrete hormones that go into the bloodstream here, and then those hormones travel from the bloodstream down through this set of what's called hypophyseal portal veins in the stalk, the infundibulum, and then down into the anterior lobe. Within the anterior lobe, certain hormones will be released. There's two kinds of hormones that are secreted by the hypothalamus, what are called releasing hormones and what are called inhibiting hormones. The releasing hormones stimulate the anterior lobe to secrete certain hormones, and the inhibiting hormones inhibit the release of certain hormones from the anterior lobe. The hypothalamus also plays a role with the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. In this particular case, what we have are neurosecretory cells up in the hypothalamus whose axons extend down into the posterior lobe. These neurosecretory cells produce hormones which travel down through the axon, and then when they get down here to the axon terminal within the posterior lobe, they are released. The two hormones, oxytocin, which helps stimulate labor contractions when a mother is giving birth, and also a hormone known as antidiuretic hormone. Both of those hormones are made up in the hypothalamus, but are released from the posterior pituitary gland. In contrast to that are the other hormones that are made up in the hypothalamus, but they enter the bloodstream down here and then stimulate other hormones to be released from the anterior lobe.